The chandeliers of the Grand Atoria Hotel sparkled like 1,000 captured stars, flooding the marble ballroom in soft golden light. The air shimmered with wealth, the scent of imported lilies mingling with perfume worth more than a working man's yearly wage. Every corner echoed with polite laughter, champagne toasts, and the crisp shuffle of designer heels gliding across polished floors. For the city's elite, this was more than a charity gala. It was a stage where power dressed itself in velvet and diamonds. Behind every smile hid a transaction, every compliment a calculation. The wealthy called it philanthropy. The staff called it another night of pretending not to exist. Among those invisible souls was Cassandra Riley, known simply as Cassie to the few who remembered her name. Her black and white waitress uniform was pressed to perfection, her dark hair pinned neatly, her expression calm and unreadable. She moved between tables like music, graceful, precise, silent. Every gesture, every step rehearsed 1,000 times in the theater of survival. Tonight's event was a fundraiser for the St. Jude Children's Foundation, a place Cassie had admired since childhood. Once she'd dreamed of performing ballet on that same stage for charity, letting movement raise money instead of sweat and blisters. But dreams, she'd learned, don't pay hospital bills. As she crossed the ballroom carrying a tray of champagne, a faint throb pulsed in her feet, 16 hours into a double shift. But she ignored it. Pain was a familiar rhythm now. What hurt more was the memory that still lingered from that morning. The email that began with, "We regret to inform you." The Donovan Academy of Arts had rejected her scholarship application. Again, 4 years ago, Cassie had been one of their most promising ballet candidates, a rare natural talent whose performances could make entire audiences hold their breath. But that was before life crushed the stage beneath her feet. Her father, James Riley, a construction foreman, had fallen 3 stories at work. One broken spine later, her dream dissolved into medical bills and night shifts. Cassie traded satin slippers for slip-resistant shoes and learned that the stage of survival was lit by fluorescent bulbs, not spotlights. "Keep your head high, Riley," her manager Genevieve Peterson had whispered before the guests arrived. "These people can smell fear. Be polite, be invisible, and no matter what happens, never react." That advice had kept Cassie safe for years. But tonight, the universe was about to test it. The orchestra shifted from jazz to a waltz as the night's highlight began, the arrival of Preston Montgomery III, the golden boy of New York finance. Heir to a fortune built on shipping and tech, he was handsome in the way privilege often is, chiseled, self-assured, and untouched by humility. His fiancée, Veronica Davenport, dripped in red silk and arrogance. Cameras flashed as they entered, their smiles flawless, their entitlement radiant. Cassie had seen hundreds like them, the kind who believed kindness was currency they no longer needed. As she poured water at table 12, a voice cut through the room, smooth, deep, and dripping with superiority. "Look at them," Preston said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, moving around like little wind-up dolls. No spark, no passion, just clockwork hands serving real people. Laughter followed, cold, rehearsed laughter from his circle of friends. Veronica leaned in and whispered something that made him smirk wider. Cassie's hand trembled just slightly as she refilled a glass. She forced her face neutral. Never react, but his next words stabbed deeper. "I bet if you asked one of them to dance, they'd freeze. Poor souls wouldn't know what rhythm even feels like." Cassie turned away, her heart pounding. He didn't know her. He didn't know that rhythm once defined her life. That dance had been her first language before poverty silenced it. Across the room, a spotlight swept over the marble floor as the host announced the evening's entertainment, a short classical performance. The pianist approached the grand piano, the melody beginning softly. Preston Board sipped his drink, then his gaze locked on Cassie again. "You!" he called out suddenly, his tone half drunk, half daring. "You with the tray. Come here." The music faltered for a beat. Heads turned. Cassie froze, the tray balanced perfectly in her hands. Every eye in the ballroom pinned her in place. Her manager's warning echoed in her mind. Never react. But Preston wasn't done. "We've been talking about rhythm," he said, grinning. "How about you show us what you've got? Dance for us." A gasp rippled through the guests. Someone muttered, "Is he serious?" Veronica laughed behind her manicured hand. Oh, Preston, don't embarrass her. She's working. Exactly, he said with mock charm. And I'm offering a little tip. Make it worth her while. He placed $100 bill on the table like a challenge. Laughter erupted again. Cassie's cheeks burned. Her hands clenched behind the tray, but her voice, quiet, steady, emerged. I'm here to serve drinks, sir. Not to entertain. Everything's entertainment, sweetheart, Preston said, leaning back. You just have to know your audience. For a moment, she saw nothing but the polished floor beneath her feet, her reflection fractured in the marble. She wanted to disappear, but somewhere deep inside, a voice she hadn't heard in years stirred. The stage doesn't belong to them, Cassie. It belongs to whoever has the courage to step onto it. Her father used to say that, back when he'd sit in the front row of her recitals, clapping louder than anyone else. Genevieve appeared at her side, whispering urgently, Cassie, just walk away. I'll handle this, but Preston laughed. No, let her speak. I like her spirit. Cassie straightened her back. Enjoy your evening, sir, she said softly and turned to leave. Then Veronica's voice sliced through the air like glass. Oh, come on, it's just a little dance. You don't want to seem afraid, do you? Cassie stopped. The word afraid landed like a spark in dry grass. Every suppressed humiliation, every rejection, every sleepless night fueled the quiet fire in her chest. She turned slowly, setting the tray down on a nearby table. You want to dance? She said, her tone calm. Fine. The room went utterly still. Even the pianist's fingers paused above the keys. Preston blinked, surprised. Wait, you're serious? You dared me, Cassie said. So I'll accept. Whispers spread like wildfire across the ballroom. Guests leaned forward, phones subtly raised to record. The host, uncertain, nodded to the pianist, who hesitated, then began to play a slow, haunting melody. Cassie stepped into the center of the floor. The marble reflected her like a mirror. For the first time in years, she felt the air shift around her, the familiar silence before movement, the gravity of an unseen audience. Her heart beat not with fear, but with memory. She closed her eyes, and then she danced. At first, the crowd laughed again. Her uniform looked absurd under the chandeliers, her shoes plain, her setting wrong. But as the first graceful arc of her arm caught the light, the laughter died. Her movements were liquid and precise, each gesture carved from discipline and pain. She spun, dipped, and leapt with an elegance that didn't belong to a servant, but to an artist reclaiming her power. The melody rose, and so did she, her body a story of survival told through motion. Preston's smirk vanished. Veronica's laughter faded to stunned silence. Cassie moved as if the music was her pulse. Each step a confession, each turn a victory. The crowd was no longer watching a waitress. They were witnessing something sacred. The pianist, mesmerized, shifted into a full sonata, following her rhythm instinctively. The lights shimmered across her skin, sweat and tears blending into something luminous. In that moment, Cassie wasn't serving anyone. She was serving truth. When the final note trembled into silence, she stood still in the center of the ballroom, chest rising and falling, eyes bright with unspoken emotion. No one moved. Then, one by one, people began to clap. Tentatively at first, then louder, rising into a standing ovation that shook the chandeliers. Preston sat frozen, his pride shattered. Veronica looked away, her perfect smile gone. Cassie bowed once simply, then stepped off the floor, picked up her tray and walked back toward the service corridor. Her hands still trembled, not from fear but release. As she disappeared through the door, someone shouted, "Who is she?" And somewhere in the back of the room, a man in a tailored gray suit, the event sponsor and art patron Michael Laurent, was already asking the same question. Outside, in the quiet hallway, Cassie leaned against the wall, her breath shaky but her soul lighter than it had been in years. Through the closed doors, she could still hear the applause echoing. For the first time since her father's accident, she felt alive again. Little did she know, that impromptu dance, the one born from humiliation, would soon ignite a chain of events that would change her life forever. The applause from the ballroom still thundered in Cassie's ears as she leaned against the service hallway wall, trying to steady her breathing. Her chest rose and fell in quick waves. Her palms were trembling, not from nerves but from the flood of everything she had just released on that marble floor. For a moment, she closed her eyes. The music still pulsed behind her eyelids, the memory of each spin and leap replaying in vivid flashes. For 7 minutes she hadn't been a waitress. She had been a dancer again, free, untamed, alive. "Riley," a voice hissed. Cassie opened her eyes. Genevieve stood in the corridor doorway, her usually stern face a mixture of shock and awe. "What on earth did you just do?" Cassie blinked, unsure whether to defend or apologize. "He dared me," she said softly. "So I danced." Genevieve rubbed her forehead, torn between frustration and pride. "You're lucky the guests loved it. The owner's already asking who trained you. But if anyone higher up complains—" "They won't," came another voice from behind Genevieve. A tall man in a gray suit stepped forward, his expression curious, his tone composed. He looked about mid-40s with sharp eyes softened by understanding. "Michael Laurent," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "Art patron, sponsor of tonight's gala. That was remarkable, Miss Riley." Cassie hesitated, then shook his hand lightly. "Thank you, sir." "Tell me," Laurent continued, "where did you learn to move like that?" Her lips curved into a faint, sad smile. "Once upon a time I trained at Donovan Academy. But life had other plans." Laurent nodded slowly. "Life always does. Still, talent like that doesn't vanish, it waits." He slipped her a card. "Call me tomorrow. I'd like to discuss something. You deserve a real stage." Then, with a gentle smile, he walked away, leaving Cassie frozen, clutching the card like a lifeline. Back inside the ballroom, Preston Montgomery III sat motionless in his chair. His friends had fallen silent. The echo of applause had turned into an uncomfortable hum of murmurs. "What the hell just happened?" Blake muttered. Veronica fanned herself with her clutch, her voice dripping venom. "She's a waitress, Preston, not a prima ballerina." Preston's eyes stayed fixed on the dance floor where moments ago, that same waitress had commanded every gaze in the room, including his. He could still see the grace in her every motion, the way she transformed humiliation into art. For the first time in years, he felt small. When the applause finally faded, whispers replaced laughter. Someone at the next table was saying, "Did you see her? My God, she was brilliant." Another whispered, "I heard she used to be a professional dancer." The tide had shifted. Preston felt it. "Relax, darling," Veronica whispered. "You gave them a little entertainment. You should take credit for discovering her." But Preston didn't respond. Something about her tone made him flinch. Discovering her? No, he had mocked her, and she had turned that mockery into victory. He stood abruptly, ignoring the eyes that followed him, and muttered, "I need air." Outside the Grandatoria, New York hummed its endless night symphony. Horns, laughter, footsteps, and the whisper of cold wind brushing the city's skin. Preston loosened his tie and walked toward the fountain, the marble glistening under streetlights. His reflection stared back from the rippling water, handsome, confident, untouchable. But for the first time he saw cracks in that image. He replayed the scene in his head. Her poise, her defiance, her grace, it was the kind of power money couldn't buy. And it had come from someone he'd called a wind-up doll. Who was she? He didn't know, but he wanted to. Behind him, footsteps echoed. Veronica emerged, heels clicking against stone. "Preston," she sighed, sliding her arm through his. "Let's go home." "It's late, he didn't move. What's wrong with you?" she asked, her voice sharp now. "You're not actually thinking about that girl, are you?" He looked at her, tired. "I'm thinking about how I looked in there." "You looked like yourself," Veronica said coldly. "Rich, powerful, in control." "No," Preston murmured. "I looked like a fool." Her lips tightened. "Oh, please. Don't go soft now. She's a waitress. You're a Montgomery." He turned toward her, something different in his eyes, a spark of realization. And that's exactly the problem. For a long second, they stared at each other. Then Preston walked away, leaving Veronica standing alone under the marble arch, her reflection twisting in the fountain's water. Meanwhile, in a small two-room apartment on the edge of Harlem, Cassie sat beside her father's wheelchair. The night's events replayed like a movie in her head. Her father looked up from his worn recliner, his voice raspy but warm. "You're glowing, pumpkin. Did something happen?" Cassie smiled faintly. "You could say that." She told him everything, the dare, the dance, the applause, the man with the business card. When she finished, her father chuckled softly. "Well, seems like fate finally tripped over itself to find you again." She laughed, then sighed. "I don't want to hope too much, Dad. Every time I do, it ends the same way." He reached over and squeezed her hand. Cassie, you didn't just dance for them tonight, you danced for yourself. That's not hope. That's healing. Tears welled in her eyes. She nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. I just wish Mom could have seen it. She did, James whispered. She always does. The next morning, sunlight spilled through cracked blinds. Cassie sat at the small kitchen table, Michael Laurent's card in front of her. Her coffee had gone cold. She picked up the phone. Laurent Foundation, a receptionist answered. Hi, this is Cassandra Riley. Mr. Laurent asked me to call. A brief pause. One moment, Miss Riley. Seconds later, Laurent's voice came through, calm, warm. Miss Riley, thank you for calling. I was hoping you would. I wasn't sure if you meant it, Cassie said. Oh, I meant every word, he replied. There's an upcoming gala for the New York Arts Initiative. They're looking for new faces, dancers who represent resilience and grace. I think you'd be perfect. Come by my office tomorrow. We'll talk, Cassie's heart pounded. Are you serious? I don't joke about art, Laurent said kindly. See you at 10. When she hung up, her father was grinning ear to ear. You see? Healing, not hoping. That same morning, Preston sat in his penthouse office overlooking the skyline, his assistant flipping through news clippings. Sir, she said, this video's trending. Waitress shocks millionaire at charity gala. It's all over social media. Preston frowned. What video? She turned the laptop around. There it was, Cassie's dance filmed from 3 angles, already at 500,000 views. The title burned in bright letters. She was dared to dance, they laughed. Then this happened. Preston leaned forward, watching in silence. The room around him faded. All he saw was her, strong, elegant, fearless. When it ended, he exhaled slowly. Find out her name, his assistant hesitated. Sir, the comments already did. Cassandra Riley works at the Grand Atoria, he nodded. Cancel my morning meetings, sir. I'm going to the hotel. By the time he arrived, Cassie was back in her uniform, clearing tables from breakfast service. The staff whispered as he entered. His tailored suit drew every gaze. Mr. Montgomery, Genevieve said quickly, rushing to intercept him. Last night was— I'm not here to complain, Preston said calmly. I'm here to speak with Miss Riley. Cassie froze, the tray in her hand suddenly heavier. Slowly she turned. He approached her carefully, stopping a few feet away. Miss Riley. Her tone was polite but firm. Mr. Montgomery. The room went silent. Even the clatter of dishes paused. I came to apologize, he said quietly. I behaved like an arrogant fool. You didn't deserve that. Cassie blinked, stunned. You came here just to say that? Yes, and to say— He hesitated, choosing his words. That your performance last night reminded me what class really looks like. There was no smugness in his voice this time. Only sincerity. Cassie studied him for a moment. Apology accepted, she said simply. Then softer. But you should know, your dare didn't humiliate me. It reminded me who I was. Preston nodded slowly. I can see that. He turned to leave, but before he did, he added, For what it's worth, Miss Riley, you shocked everyone, including me. When he was gone, Genevieve exhaled. Well, that's a first. A Montgomery apologizing. Cassie didn't answer. Her hand drifted to her pocket where Laurent's card rested. Her future suddenly seemed to glimmer, uncertain but alive. That night in his penthouse, Preston couldn't sleep. He sat on the balcony, city lights glowing below, the sound of distant sirens fading into the hum of thought. He had always measured people by wealth, by status, by the way they fit into his world. But that girl, she didn't fit. She shattered it. In another life, he thought, maybe they could have met differently, not as master and servant, but as two people chasing different kinds of rhythm. He didn't realize that this was only the beginning, that fate had already written a second meeting for them. And this time, it wouldn't be by accident. Morning sunlight spilled through the wide glass windows of the Laurent Foundation for the Arts, turning the marble floors to gold. Inside the airy studio, mirrors lined every wall and a soft classical melody drifted through the room. Cassie stood in the center, barefoot, wearing a plain leotard and leggings that she had dug out from the back of her closet. Her reflection stared back, older, leaner, and touched by struggle, but still holding that same spark that had once lit stages. She closed her eyes and took a breath. Miss Riley, came Laurent's calm voice from behind her. You remember what I told you yesterday? She nodded. To dance like no one owes me a thing, he smiled. Exactly. Because no one does. But when you move with truth, they'll feel like they owe you the world. He pressed play on the speaker. A haunting violin began to swell through the room. Cassie lifted her arms. And just like that, the years melted away. Her body remembered what her mind had tried to forget. The discipline, the grace, the precision. She moved with fluid purpose, every spin powered by years of pain turned into strength. Laurent watched silently, his expression unreadable. When the music faded, Cassie stood still, breathing hard, sweat shining on her skin. Laurent clapped slowly. You still have it, he said. But I need to see more than technique. I need to see your story. Cassie frowned slightly. My story? He nodded. You're auditioning for the New York Arts Revival Gala. It's not just about dance. It's about soul. You have to show them what it costs to survive. Can you do that? Cassie's gaze fell to the floor. I've been doing that all my life. Laurent smiled faintly. Then we'll show them together. That night in a sleek midtown restaurant, Preston Montgomery III sat across from his father, Preston Montgomery II, a man whose expression seemed carved from granite. I heard about your little incident, the elder Montgomery said, swirling his wine. A waitress made you look like a fool and now you're chasing after her. Preston clenched his jaw. It's not like that. Oh? His father raised an eyebrow. Because the tabloids say otherwise. Arrogant heir humbled by waitress's dance. Do you know what that does to our family name? I don't care, Preston said quietly. That caught his father off guard. You don't care? For once, no. Preston leaned forward. Because maybe that's the problem, Dad. We care about everything except what actually matters. His father chuckled dryly. And what matters, dancers? Charity waitresses? Dignity, Preston said simply. Something money can't buy. The elder Montgomery set his glass down, his voice hardening. You sound like your mother. Preston looked up sharply. That's not an insult. Silence fell between them. For the first time in years, Preston saw the old man look uncertain. Then quietly he said, Be careful who you're inspired by, son. Not everyone's meant to stand in our world. Preston pushed back his chair and stood. Maybe it's time I left it. He walked out, leaving his father staring into his wine, an empire trembling under the weight of its own pride. The next morning, Cassie woke before dawn. She brewed coffee for her father, kissed his forehead, and left for the foundation. Every day for a week, she trained under Laurent's quiet, demanding eye. He didn't treat her like a charity case. He treated her like an artist, something she hadn't felt in years. Again, he would say, every time she thought she had given everything. You're not dancing yet, you're remembering. Don't remember, relive. Her muscles burned. Her feet blistered. But she never stopped. Between rehearsals, she would sit by the window, scrolling through her old audition clips. She saw the girl she used to be, bright-eyed, unscarred, full of dreams, and realized that she wasn't gone. Just waiting. Then one afternoon, Laurent entered the studio holding a flyer. It's official. You're performing in the Revival Gala next month. Cassie froze. What? He smiled. I submitted your video from rehearsal. They accepted you. Her breath caught. Michael, you earned it, he said simply. Now we polish your story. She sank onto the bench, covering her face with her hands as tears slipped through her fingers. I don't know if I'm ready. Laurent crouched beside her. You danced through humiliation and turned it into art, Cassie. If that's not readiness, what is? A week later, Cassie stood outside the New York Arts Revival Gala Hall, clutching her dance shoes. She was there to sign paperwork and meet other performers, but as she stepped through the revolving doors, her heart skipped. Preston Montgomery stood in the lobby. He was talking to an event coordinator, holding a folder, looking different, softer, humbler. When he noticed her, surprise flickered across his face. Then genuine warmth. Miss Riley, he said, almost relieved. Mr. Montgomery, she replied, cautious but calm. I didn't expect to see you here, he said. I could say the same. He chuckled lightly. Fair. I'm one of the sponsors for the event. Cassie arched an eyebrow. You're sponsoring an arts gala? He nodded. I thought it was time I supported something real. Laurent appeared behind her. I see you've met our dancer. Cassie, this is one of our new donors. Preston extended a hand. She hesitated, then shook it. Their eyes met, briefly, but the moment lingered. There was no trace of arrogance left in him, only quiet respect. Laurent looked between them, intrigued but silent. "We'll see you both at rehearsal," he said, walking ahead. As Cassie followed, Preston called softly, "For what it's worth." "I'm proud of you," she paused, turning halfway. "Don't be proud of me," she said. "Be better because of me." He smiled faintly. Working on it, days blurred into nights. The city buzzed with excitement for the upcoming gala. Posters appeared everywhere. New voices, new stories. Cassie's name wasn't famous, but whispers about the waitress who danced spread quietly through art circles. Preston watched from a distance. He had started volunteering at a youth mentorship program, inspired by what he'd seen in her. Discipline without entitlement. Slowly, people began to see a change in him. Meanwhile, Veronica Davenport, furious at her ex-fiancé's public humility, began feeding gossip to tabloids.
"He's infatuated with her," she told one journalist.
It's pathetic, but Preston ignored the noise. For once, his purpose wasn't to control the narrative, it was to change it. Then came the night of the gala. The auditorium glowed with anticipation. Rows of dignitaries, patrons, and media filled the seats. Laurent's foundation had sponsored the opening performance, Cassie's performance. Backstage, Cassie sat alone, wrapping her shoes, her heart hammering. She could hear the muffled roar of the crowd beyond the curtain. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "You didn't just dance for them that night, Cassie. You danced for yourself," Laurent peeked in. "Ready?" Cassie smiled nervously. "As I'll ever be." "Then remember," he said softly, "this isn't revenge, it's revelation." The lights dimmed. The announcer's voice boomed. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Cassandra Riley performing Rise." The stage went dark. Then, a single spotlight illuminated her. She began in silence, one slow movement, one trembling breath. Her body told her story: struggle, heartbreak, loss. The music swelled, violins rising like dawn over sorrow. Her motions grew stronger, spins sharper, leaps higher. Every pirouette was a scream. Every pause a wound reopened and healed again. The audience leaned forward, caught in her rhythm. Then came the final sequence. She spun, collapsed to her knees, and lifted her face to the light as if defying gravity itself. The last note echoed. Silence fell. Then the hall erupted, thunderous applause. Tears, standing ovations. Laurent in the wings wiped his eyes. Even the critics in the front row were speechless. And somewhere in the second row, Preston stood slowly, clapping with everyone else. But his expression was more than admiration. It was reverence. Cassie bowed once, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. For the first time since she was 17, she felt whole. After the performance, reporters surrounded Laurent and Cassie, flashing cameras and questions. Who trained you? What inspired the routine? How does it feel to be the face of the revival gala? Cassie smiled modestly. It feels like I finally found my way home. Amid the chaos, Preston waited near the exit. When she spotted him, she excused herself and walked over. "You were incredible," he said quietly. "Thank you," she whispered. "I mean it. You changed people tonight, including me." She looked at him, reading the sincerity in his eyes. "I didn't dance to change you, Preston, but I'm glad it did," he smiled sadly. "I used to think success was about owning rooms like that. Turns out it's about earning them." Cassie tilted her head. "Maybe we both learned something." He nodded. "I'm still learning." Later that night, Cassie returned home. Her father was awake, the TV still on. "You did it, didn't you?" he asked, grinning. She laughed through her tears. "Yeah, Dad, I did." He patted her hand. "Your mom would have been proud." Cassie sat beside him, resting her head on his shoulder as the city lights shimmered through the window. In the distance, the faint echoes of applause seemed to linger, not from the crowd but from life itself finally clapping for her. The morning after the gala felt unreal. Cassie awoke to the sound of her phone buzzing nonstop. Messages, emails, calls from news outlets, talent agents, reporters. Her video had gone viral again, but this time it wasn't a grainy clip from a charity night. It was her official performance, broadcast across social media, hailed as the dance that stole New York. She scrolled through the comments, stunned. This isn't just dance, and it's healing in motion. She turned pain into poetry. Who is Cassandra Riley? We need her story. Cassie laughed and cried at once. Her father, sitting nearby with his coffee, grinned. Well, looks like my little girl's finally got her spotlight back. She smiled through tears. It's overwhelming. James nodded. It's deserved. Meanwhile, at his downtown office, Preston watched the same video for the 100th time. Each frame was a reminder of everything he'd once dismissed. There was power in humility, and he was finally beginning to understand it. He had spent the past few weeks volunteering at the city's youth center, funding art programs instead of luxury dinners. The kids called him Mr. P, laughing when he tried to keep up with their basketball games. For the first time in his life, people liked him for who he was, not what he owned, but one question still lingered. Did Cassie forgive me? Really? He wanted to tell her how her courage had changed him, that her dance hadn't just humbled him. It had healed something he didn't even know was broken. The interview a week later, Cassie stood in front of a TV camera at the Laurent Foundation, nervous but composed. The talk show host smiled brightly. We're here with the woman whose performance has inspired millions. Cassandra Riley, thank you for joining us. Cassie smiled politely. Thank you for having me. Your story has touched so many hearts. From waitress to viral sensation. That's a movie script right there. How does it feel? Cassie hesitated. It feels surreal, but I didn't do it for fame. I danced because I needed to remember who I was. And who are you now? She smiled softly. Someone who believes again, the host nodded. Rumor has it you're working closely with Michael Laurent. What's that been like? Cassie's face lit up. He believed in me when no one else did. He gave me a stage, a second chance. Backstage, Laurent watched the interview on a monitor. His expression was thoughtful, almost haunted. Laurent's secret, that evening Laurent sat alone in his office gazing at an old photograph on his desk. It showed a much younger Cassie in a white ballet costume mid-spin, a performance from years ago at the Donovan Academy. His phone rang. It was his assistant. Sir, the press is asking for a statement about your connection to Cassandra Riley. He exhaled. Tell them she's an artist I believe in. Nothing more. When he hung up, he whispered to himself, if only that were true. Because the truth was, Laurent had known Cassie long before the gala. Years ago, he had been one of the Donovan Academy's major donors. He remembered her audition vividly, a 17-year-old girl who danced with so much emotion that the judges wept. He had wanted to sponsor her then, but the board had denied it, preferring a candidate with more financial backing. He'd always regretted it. And when he saw her again that night at the Grand Atoria, a waitress who still carried the grace of that same girl, he knew fate was offering him a second chance to make it right. The tabloid storm, but not everyone was celebrating Cassie's rise. Veronica Davenport was still furious, still vindictive, and had found her next headline. She leaked a story claiming Cassie and Laurent were having an affair, that her fame was a product of favoritism, not talent. By morning, tabloids screamed, from waitress to Laurent's muse, the truth behind the viral dancer. Cassie woke up to hundreds of messages, half praise, half poison. Her phone buzzed again, this time from an unknown number. Preston. Preston. Don't read the comments. It's garbage, Cassie. They're saying I'm sleeping my way into success. Preston. You and I both know that's not true. Let me help you handle this. Cassie. No, I can handle it. But her hands trembled as she put the phone down. Confrontation. That afternoon, Cassie stormed into Laurent's office holding a newspaper. Did you see this? She demanded. Laurent looked up, his calm expression breaking. I did. It's a lie. Then tell them, she snapped. Tell them the truth, that you barely knew me before the gala. Laurent hesitated. Cassie's eyes narrowed. Michael, why did you hesitate? He sighed and stood. Because I did know you once. Years ago. She blinked. What? I was on the scholarship board at Donovan Academy. I saw your audition. I wanted to help you, but the board refused. I promised myself that if I ever found you again, I'd give you the chance you deserved. Cassie felt the ground shift under her feet. So this was pity? No, Laurent said firmly. This was redemption for both of us. I failed you once. I won't fail you again. Tears welled in her eyes. You should have told me. You're right, he said softly. But I needed you to believe you earned it, because you did. She stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked out. The newspaper crumpled in her hand. The fallout the next few days were brutal. Reporters hounded her. Social media twisted every word she'd ever said. Hashtags trended. Sponsors hesitated. Laurent released a statement. Miss Riley's success is her own. My only role was recognizing talent. But the damage was done. Cassie locked herself in her apartment for 3 days, ignoring calls, ignoring offers, until one evening, there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find Preston standing there, holding a small takeout bag. I brought dinner, he said softly. She blinked in surprise. You didn't have to. I wanted to, he replied. And before you ask, no, this isn't pity either. She let him in. The two sat quietly at her tiny kitchen table, steam rising from the noodles. For a while, neither spoke. Finally, Preston said, You know what I realized? You don't need anyone's permission to be great. Not Laurent's, not mine. Not the internet's, Cassie sighed. It's hard to believe that when the world keeps doubting you. I know, he said quietly. But I used to be that world. And I was wrong. She looked at him, really looked, and saw how much he'd changed. His arrogance was gone, replaced by something raw and honest. He met her gaze. Let me help you fix this. Not because I owe you, but because I believe in you. Cassie hesitated, then nodded. All right, but on one condition. Name it, no PR tricks. No pity stories. Just truth, he smiled. Deal, the redemption show 2 weeks later. The New York Post ran a new headline. Cassandra Riley, Grace in the Face of Lies. The article detailed her journey, her father's accident, her years of service work, her persistence. It included statements from former teachers, fellow waitresses, even patients from hospitals she'd once fundraised for. Preston had organized it all. Quietly, carefully, truthfully, the public opinion shifted again. The noise faded, replaced by admiration. When Cassie saw the article, she smiled faintly. You did this? Preston shrugged. I told your story. The world needed to hear it. Thank you, she whispered. He smiled. You already thanked me by proving me wrong. The Revelation performance a month later. The Laurent Foundation hosted a charity showcase titled The Dance of Truth. Cassie was the headliner. Before she stepped on stage, Laurent found her backstage. Cassie, he said, his tone softer than ever. I want you to know I'm proud. Not because you succeeded, but because you didn't let bitterness define you. She smiled gently. Thank you. For giving me the chance to remember who I was. Laurent nodded. And for reminding me who I should have been. She squeezed his hand, then walked onto the stage. The hall darkened. The music began. A slow piano echoing like memory. Cassie danced again. Not for redemption, not for revenge, but for peace. Every step told her truth. Every movement shed a piece of the pain that had once held her down. As she spun in the final light, the audience rose to their feet. Preston clapped from the front row, his eyes shining. Laurent wiped a tear, and Cassie Riley, smiled through the tears, knowing that this time, her story belonged entirely to her. After the show, Preston approached her backstage. You did it again, he said softly. She laughed. It's kind of my thing now, he grinned. So what's next for Cassandra Riley? She looked thoughtful. I'm starting a community studio, free classes for kids who can't afford lessons. I want to give them what I never had, a safe stage. Preston's smile widened. Then count me in. As a donor. Quietly this time, she raised an eyebrow. Quietly? Yeah, he said. Some dances don't need a spotlight, Cassie laughed. Then welcome to the team, Mr. Montgomery. Epilogue. Grace revealed months later. Posters around the city read, The Cassie Riley Studio of Movement, where dreams learn to dance again. Children filled the rooms with laughter, hope, and rhythm. Cassie guided them gently, teaching them not just steps but courage. In one corner hung a framed photograph, a snapshot of that first gala, her arms outstretched under golden light, eyes fierce with freedom. Beneath it, a quote in her handwriting, Dignity isn't given. It's claimed, one dance at a time. The rain fell gently over the city that night, not in chaos but in rhythm. It was the kind of soft, steady rain that seemed to wash away everything old. The sidewalks shimmered under the streetlights, and the glass towers of Manhattan glowed like quiet giants watching over the sleeping world. Inside a small studio on the corner of 82nd and Amsterdam, a group of children laughed, danced, and stumbled through their first lesson. At the center of the room, Cassandra Riley stood barefoot, clapping her hands in rhythm. Her black hair was tied up in a loose bun, and her face glowed with warmth rather than glamour. "No, no, Eli," she laughed, kneeling to guide a tiny boy's posture. "You don't have to be perfect, just be brave." The boy grinned. "Like you, Miss Cassie?" She smiled softly. "Exactly." On the wall behind her hung a mural, painted by one of the kids, showing a dancer reaching toward a rising sun. Below it, words written in gold paint read, "Grace is not about never falling. It's about rising every time you do." The new beginning months had passed since the scandal. The rumors had burned out. The headlines had faded, but the legacy of her courage remained. Cassie's foundation, the Riley Studio of Movement, was thriving. Dozens of children from low-income families came each week to learn, to play, to dream. She charged nothing. Donations poured in quietly, most of them anonymous. But Cassie knew exactly who one of them came from. Every month a check arrived in a white envelope with no return address. The handwriting was familiar, elegant, and unpretentious. It simply read, "For the next generation of dreamers." And Cassie always smiled, knowing it was from Preston Montgomery III. A man rewritten, Preston had changed. The world could see it, not through interviews or public gestures, but through the silence of his actions. He'd sold his luxury car collection, donating the proceeds to fund art scholarships. He turned his family's dormant warehouse into an after-school program for teens. And perhaps most surprising of all, but he reconciled with his father. It had taken time. Pride had to die first. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Preston visited his father at the family estate. The older man stood in the garden, staring at the fountain where Preston used to play as a child. "I read about what you did," his father said quietly. "The donations, the outreach. I didn't think you had it in you." Preston smiled faintly. "Neither did I, until someone reminded me what real worth looks like." His father turned, eyes softening. "That waitress?" "That woman," Preston corrected gently. "Her name is Cassandra Riley, and she taught me more about dignity than this house ever did." The elder Montgomery studied him for a long time, then nodded slowly. Maybe it's time the Montgomery name stood for something better. The invitation one evening, Cassie was locking up her studio when she found an envelope slipped under the door. Inside was a gold invitation card embossed with the emblem of the New York Arts Revival Society. She frowned, reading aloud, "We are honored to invite you, Cassandra Riley, as a keynote performer and speaker for the annual Art of Humanity Gala, to celebrate those who remind the world of grace." Her heart skipped. Below the signature was a name she hadn't expected. Preston Montgomery III, Chairperson, Arts Revival Fund. The night of the gala felt like stepping through a memory, back into the world of chandeliers, gowns, and champagne. But this time Cassie didn't wear a uniform. She wore a flowing silver dress that shimmered with movement, her head held high. As she entered, people turned, not out of curiosity, but admiration. Preston was waiting by the staircase, looking every bit the man she'd once dared to defy, but now with humility in his eyes. "Welcome back to the Grand Atoria," he said, smiling. Cassie looked around, remembering the night she'd been humiliated here. "Feels different now." "It should," Preston said softly. "It's yours tonight." The speech when the lights dimmed and the spotlight found her. Cassie took the stage. She looked out at the crowd, men and women who once lived behind the masks of wealth and pretense. And she smiled, not out of victory, but peace. "A few years ago," she began, "I was serving drinks in this very room. I remember being invisible. I remember thinking my dreams had expired, that grace belonged to the rich, not to the broken." The audience fell utterly silent. "But I learned something that night. Grace doesn't come from privilege. It comes from pain. From standing when life tells you to kneel. From forgiving those who mocked you. From dancing even when no one is watching." She paused, her voice trembling but steady. "I was dared to dance, and in that moment I remembered who I was. I realize no one can take away your worth if you refuse to surrender it. Tears glistened in the audience. Laurent, seated near the front, clapped slowly, his expression filled with quiet pride. Preston stood too, clapping until the room joined him. The applause thundered, not just for her words, but for everything they represented. The dance of redemption. After her speech, the lights dimmed again. A single piano note echoed. Cassie stepped into the spotlight one last time. But this dance was different. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't practiced. It was raw, improvisation born from truth. Every move told the story of a woman who'd walked through humiliation, who'd stood her ground, who'd turned pain into grace. When the final note faded, she knelt, tears in her eyes, not of sorrow, but gratitude. And this time, when she stood again, she found Preston beside her. Extending his hand not as a dare, but as a partner, he whispered, "May I?" She smiled softly. "Only if you can keep up." The audience laughed as he joined her, clumsy but sincere. Together they danced, and not perfectly but beautifully. It wasn't about rhythm anymore. It was about redemption. Full circle, months later, spring came to New York like a song. Cassie's studio expanded to 2 new branches. The kids performed in their first showcase, proudly wearing t-shirts that read, "Dream, Dance, Defy." Laurent retired from the foundation, naming Cassie as his successor. She cried when he told her, "I'm not sure I can fill your shoes." He smiled. "You're not supposed to. You're supposed to dance in your own." As for Preston, he stayed by her side, not as a savior, but as an equal. They spent weekends volunteering together, teaching underprivileged kids about art, about hope, about second chances. Their bond wasn't rushed. It grew like the rhythm of a waltz, slow, patient, full of meaning. One evening, after a children's recital, Preston looked at her as the kids ran off laughing. "You know," he said softly, "I never thanked you properly." "For what?" she asked. "For saving me from myself." Cassie smiled, looking out at the children twirling in the sunset. "We saved each other." The final scene years later, the Grandatoria Ballroom hosted another gala, but this time, a new plaque hung at its entrance, dedicated to Cassandra Riley, whose courage reminded the world that grace begins where pride ends. Cassie stood quietly before it, her reflection shimmering in the polished gold. Preston walked up beside her, now older, his hair flecked with silver. "Still feels strange seeing your name on a plaque?" he teased. She laughed softly. "A little, but it's not mine alone. It's for everyone who ever felt small and chose to rise anyway." He nodded, slipping his hand gently into hers. "Then it's perfect." They turned toward the dance floor as the orchestra began to play. The same haunting waltz from that night years ago. Cassie looked up at him, smiling. "Careful, Mr. Montgomery, last time you challenged me, I shocked you." He grinned. "Then I can't wait to be shocked again." They stepped into the light together, moving with the grace of people who had finally made peace with their past. And as the music swelled, the crowd watched not a billionaire and a waitress, not a redemption or a spectacle, but 2 souls who had learned that sometimes the bravest dance is the one that begins after forgiveness. Epilogue years later. Journalists would still write about the woman who danced her way into history, but Cassie never cared for the fame. For her, the truest applause came from the children she taught. Each step, each smile, each spark of confidence reflected the journey she once walked. And every evening, as she locked her studio doors, she would glance at the framed quote near the entrance, her favorite words of all. "The stage doesn't belong to the powerful. It belongs to the brave." She would smile, whisper goodnight to her reflection, and walk into the city lights, graceful, free, and unbreakable, because she had finally learned the truth. The dance never ends. It only changes partners.